DraftKings wide receiver analysis for Week 14. I'm Jason Gilba, JGilba11. With me is Justin Elick at BigAiley42. Taking a look at wideouts this week, and I opened up your articles. There was no real surprise to me as who kicked things off, and on both of them. Usually you like to mix it up, but it's hard to do that this week.
I mean, this week, this isn't even just me. I mean, it's just the most obvious play on the board, as far as the top-end guys, at least. I mean, Mike Evans against the Saints. I mean, Jameis Winston will try to ruin this for him like he ruined everything last week with only 6 targets. But, I mean, that Saints defense, I know it says Football Outsiders has them 12th against number 1 receivers. I mean, that's a bottom 5 pass defense, and even that's pretty generous. I mean, if the only way that I see Evans not having a huge game is if Tampa Bay's defense takes over and this game gets out of hand early. But I don't think – they've been playing better. I don't think that'll happen, though. I mean, Mike Evans has huge upside in this game.
Yeah, Spencer mentioned that, in terms of a wide receiver cornerback matchup, that Evans has the number 1 on the board this week in terms of advantage. So, I'm not taking that number 12 there with any real worry.
No, I'm not either. And, I mean, Mike Evans, like last week, they didn't really need him to do a whole lot. This week, I mean, it's a great time to be Mike Evans. And obviously FanDuel and DraftKings colluding as usual and have him as the number 1 price receiver. So, obviously, it's not just my love for Mike Evans that has him as the number 1 receiver this week because they're all over him too. I mean, you price him over Antonio Brown after last week's game, everyone's expecting a huge performance from him this week.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of Antonio Brown here, 8,700, so price down just a little bit. On the road against the Bills, you're not really worried about Big Ben's, home road splits because obviously you're looking at here at still a 25-team total.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a spot where obviously it's the top 2 price receivers here listed as the cash game options. There's a couple really cheap receivers we'll get to in a couple minutes. So if you want to put in both these guys, you can. You're not getting both these guys and David Johnson. So we'll get to that later. But, I mean, if you just want safety, obviously, I mean, Antonio Brown's the number 1 wide receiver as far as consistency goes. And it's really not even close. I mean, you look at what he's done his last 6 games. He's got 2 games over 30, 2 over 20. And then the other 2, I think they were 15 and 17. So, I mean, pretty much every week he's getting looks. And the crazy thing is I keep looking at the red zone numbers every week, even though I watch most of his games. As much as I hate the Steelers, he's awesome to watch. He really just doesn't have a ton of looks inside the 20 because he gets so many looks from further out. So, I mean, this is a guy that just scores a ton of touchdowns. He's only got 10 targets inside the 20-yard line this season. And he's caught 6 of them. He's only got 5 targets inside the 10-yard line. So that just tells you how much more upside he's got because he's getting a ton of looks, scoring a lot of touchdowns, and most of them are 30, 40 yards out. I mean, you get the Steelers inside that 50, they're taking at least 1 shot down the field to Brown.
Yeah, I mean, I watched that Thanksgiving game when he had 3 touchdowns. I don't even think any of those were inside the 20.
No, I don't think they were either. It was, like a 33-yarder, and then –
Yeah, it was around that range.
And it's coming, and Roethlisberger doesn't even have to make – I mean, he has to make a good throw. It doesn't have to be great. You just get the ball near him.
Quit undermining Ben Roethlisberger. I know what you're trying to do.
Until the day I die. One day, when the Steelers don't get lucky by trying to sign Mike Wallace and him turning him down, and then they end up with Antonio Brown. One day when Antonio Brown's not there, you'll see Ben Roethlisberger struggle like he does when Brown's not there.
Well, I think that's the case because he'll be like 38, 39 years old.
Or next time he's hurt. Or if he goes and smokes weed with Le'Veon Bell, who knows?
Don't you say that. I need Bell in my life.
I need Brown in my all my fantasy playoffs right now, so keep on going.
GPP wideouts here, you're looking at Demaryius Thomas, 6K, taking on the Titans. And this one, I mean, obviously we're looking at a matchup basically against a secondary that's been god-awful, really, against wide receivers. I mean, bottom 5 in fantasy points allowed.
Yeah, and I mean, the crazy thing about Thomas is, he's having a good season, not a great season, but a good season, considering the fact that he's had, 2 of the worst quarterbacks, mostly Trevor Siemian, but just awful quarterback play the entire season, and he's still posting solid numbers. He's getting a ton of looks. Pretty much gets 10, almost exactly 10 every week. It was 10 for 4 straight weeks, then 11, then 8, and 10 again last week. So, I mean, he's got that good floor of targets. Obviously, he's not catching a huge percentage of the targets because they're not the most accurate looks, but he's getting a ton of looks. He's getting some red zone looks. He's got 5 touchdowns on the season. Obviously, you'd like to see a higher number there, But, coming off of a couple tough matchups against Kansas City, and then Jacksonville has been pretty good against the pass as well. Now he gets Tennessee. We saw last time he had a prime matchup was that New Orleans game, 8 for 87 and a touchdown. I'm expecting more of that type of performance than what we've seen the last couple weeks. And, he's not a terrible cash game play either. I don't think I probably would play him in cash, but if you look at his consistency, I mean, he's a double-digit scorer every single week, and he does have some upside. So, if you wanted to go a little bit cheaper and didn't quite want to pay all the way down to some of these cheap guys in cash, I don't think he's a bad secondary option there.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, what are your thoughts on Emmanuel Sanders? Emmanuel Sanders is a guy that I'm liking this week, more so on FanDuel because, he's only 5,900 there. But
yeah, I mean, I think they're both fine options. I think I'd rather have Thomas, but, we've seen Sanders has been the bigger upside guy recently. He had that 162 yards against KC. He had that 2 touchdown game against the Bengals. Was it 2 or 3? It was 2, right?
2, yeah.
2. So I think he's had more upside games than Thomas, but I think that Thomas is just a better receiver. He's bigger. He's for a bad quarterback, I'd much rather rely on a bigger, stronger target like Thomas than a guy like Sanders. Because with Sanders, you're hoping that he turns some small catches into something big. I don't know.
Yeah, he's definitely more that home run threat type of speed. It looks like Simeon is going to play this week, or at least he's pushing to play. So I think that helps them out, even though it's still not the greatest situation.
Yeah. And if Simeon plays well, you could see both guys have big games because the backfield situation sucked ever since Anderson went down. Booker scored a touchdown last week, but at 2 yards of carry, maybe not even.
Yeah. It has not been pretty.
Yeah, they can't run the ball. So if this game's competitive and they got to score points late, which you imagine that they'll have to. It's a tough matchup for the Titans, but Mariota just puts up tons of points all the time. So you imagine if the game's competitive, and it should be, then, they might both see double-digit targets.
Certainly. Randall Cobb, 5K, so pretty good discount. Basically on a guy who's been, pretty cheap all season, and probably deservingly so. But, it's kind of a sneaky game here. I kind of like the Packers offense because, Seattle's a bit banged up, and they're all cheap.
Yeah, and people just kind of, instantly look against Seattle and just don't play people. And I even made that mistake with Mike Evans a couple weeks ago and regret it. But they're beatable. They're not a team that you just instantly have to avoid. Like a couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, it's an instant no. You just don't play wide receivers against the Seahawks. But with Earl Thomas out now, that's a big loss. And they're still a good defense. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to be playing a bunch of Packers and cash games, but 5K for Randall Cobb. Guy who's had good games against him each of the last 2 times, 8 for 116, 6 for 58 and 1. Granted, Jordy Nelson didn't play in that game where he had 8 for 116. So, consider that when you're trying to figure out, what kind of success he's had. But I think if I'm going to target somebody for the Packers, it's going to be the inside, the slot receiver, rather than having to deal with, potentially Richard Sherman coverage on the outside. And, Jordy Nelson's, he's not a huge receiver. Like Mike Evans, that was a huge size advantage for him against Richard Sherman and all of them. And it really isn't quite as much for Jordy Nelson. So for me, I'm expecting if the coverage is good down the field, Randall Cobb getting the ball dumped off to him. And that Aaron Rodgers loves to look at him in the red zone. Both those guys get tons of red zone looks. And the running game, once again, crappy. So you imagine he's going to have to throw the ball in this one. And I do think Seattle's going to score plenty of points. So they're going to have to keep up. And I think 5K for Randall Cobb. I know he hasn't been good this year, but I just can't look past that price tag.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you. I think, in terms of game flow, this one could set out well for the Packers passing attack. And, you look on a PPR site like this, I think, 8 for 80 is certainly a viable option for him this week. As you mentioned, the running game's been horrendous. That short passing game basically has been their run game over the last few weeks.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't be surprised if Nelson struggles a little bit in this one and we see like 10-plus targets for Cobb.
Value wideouts here. You're looking at Robbie Anderson, obviously coming off of a game where, he was the only option basically on the field once Petty came in.
It's crazy because that team is not that bad. They have good players. It's just everyone wants to talk about all these coaches that are on the hot seat, and I don't know how Todd Bowles is not. Why he hasn't just been shipped out of town weeks ago. You've got a top shelf wide receiver in Brandon Marshall. You got a top tier running back, fringe top tier, I guess, Matt Forte. great pass catcher. They don't ever want to throw him the ball. And, I mean, granted, the quarterback play has been terrible. The line hasn't been great. But, I mean, it's almost like ever since Eric Decker went down, they're just like, well, we give up. I mean, because they just – it doesn't make any sense. But, you know, Robbie Anderson, like you said, he was good last week. When Petty played before, he got some looks. Got 4 of 12 targets last week, which, I mean, that number in itself is just – I mean, I had to double-check that and make sure that was real. But, I mean, caught a touchdown pass. He's fast. I was looking at his numbers. His pro day at Temple ran a 4.34. So, I mean, I don't know why the Raiders didn't draft him, but either way, like Robbie Anderson, I mean, he's minimum salary. I feel like no matter what format you're playing, I think he's going to be decently popular. 49ers been a horrible pass defense. I mean, I think I'll just be locking him into all of my DK lineups. I mean, he's so low risk. He's a big play threat, and Bryce Petty, like you said, doesn't want to look at anyone else. They don't use tight ends. I don't even know why they have tight ends. Other than a block. I mean, he's like the only option.
It's fun because, I mean, I think we look at this week and we look at these matchups and go, okay, you know, David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell want some exposure there. You know, Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, and we're looking for these punt wide receivers and kind of punt plays to work with. And, you know, for once, it's not a tight end spot. So you can still use a cheap tight end and use a player like Robbie Anderson and kind of get maybe a higher floor or 2 of those guys in that you didn't really think you could do at the beginning of the week.
Yeah, I mean, you could throw in like Ladarius Green or something. I think he's 3,900 tight end. Yeah. You could lock him in and put in Robbie Anderson. You could easily get a couple of those guys. So, yeah, like you said, even just for the salary relief, even if he gets like a 4 for 40 type of game, especially in cash games, that's really not going to hurt you.
No, it's definitely not, especially given the fact that you're putting her in, you know, high floor guys around him. So Taylor Gabriel next here, 4,300. Julio Jones, and we're looking at Muhammad Sanu, who's likely on the doubtful side. So
yeah, I mean, it's with all those injuries to those top 2 guys, he's going to get kind of a ton of looks by default there. And I mean, he's been pretty good anyway over his last 4 or 5 games. Should have had a touchdown last week. Got tackled at the 1-yard line, which was pretty upsetting for me having a bunch of him. But his price really hasn't gone up since he's been, you know, getting it done. He had 2 touchdowns against Arizona, a touchdown against Philly, had a rushing touchdown against Tampa Bay. And, you know, he's seen 5 or more targets in 4 straight games. I'm not saying he's going to put up wide receiver 1 type numbers if Jones and Sanu don't play, because that's too much of a stretch. But I don't think it's a stretch. I think he could see 8 or more targets in this one. They like to try to get creative and get him rushing attempts every once in a while. He's got 3 over the last 4 weeks. So kind of by default, I guess Devontae Freeman, Taylor Gabriel should see a ton of extra looks this week.
Yeah, I certainly don't mind them. I mean, still a good team total, even though they're going on the road to, you know, Rams defense. It's been respectable at times, but, you know, I think some of their interior corners are still an issue, and that kind of bodes well, especially for a speed threat like Gabriel.
Yeah, exactly. You catch one of those crossing routes, get the corner, and I mean, he can put up points in a hurry. He gone.
So, anyone that just missed the cut for you this week?
I mean, I feel like this week I'm probably going to be going, I don't want to say starters and scrubs because I don't think these cheap guys are necessarily scrubs. But, you know, the guys I was looking at in the middle, Golden Tate's been playing well. He was awful in the first game against Chicago. Detroit's playing well. I mean, I think that's a matchup where I'm kind of hesitant on him in GPPs somewhat this week because I think he'll be a little overowned. And the Bears have actually been good against the pass. So for me, I mean, the guy I really want to play is Tyrell Williams, but that shoulder is an issue. He still scored a touchdown last week. I just wish he was healthy because, I mean, he'd be a guy that's locked and loaded for me again. And then, I mean, the one other guy, still in a tough matchup, but the guy just all he does is score touchdowns. Rashard Matthews, I think he's a sneaky play because no one's going to play him against Denver.
Yeah, it's true. And I think obviously we look at this week and go, you look at the algorithms of the pricing and you see all those guys down in tougher matchups and they're priced down quite a bit.
Yeah, they're kind of trying to force you into something that you don't feel comfortable with.
Yeah, they make you think a little bit here.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's going to wrap things up with the DraftKings wide receiver analysis for Week 14. If you want to check out Justin's article, you can head on over to dailyfantasycafe.com. Be sure to check out the rest of our Week 14 content.